Hi, welcome to the Insightful Therapist, where we explore the world of mental health, personal growth, and self-awareness. I'm Alia Aizenstat Adlakha, a licensed psychotherapist, and today we have my father and trained clinical psychologist, Dr. Stephen Aizenstat. So thank you for coming on. And we haven't really done this before quite like this, so this is going to be kind of a special experience. Um, and one of the things I noticed was you came up in the last YouTube channel. Your spirit was evoked. And so I'm in some ways letting that move forward who the next guest is. And so part of a story was shared of Victoria, who's at Insight Therapy, who was at UCLA when she started therapy and immigrated from Armenia and lived, has lived in the Central Valley. And that's so much of your story. And so it just felt like the natural progression of things to invite you to be on next. So thank you for accepting.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here, and that is a story. That sounds so familiar to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I have seen you partake in, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of interviews at this point. And this one I want to be a little different because I've seen you move through so many different seasons or chapters of your professional life. You're well known for being one of the founders at Pacifica Graduate Institute and the president there for a long time. Before that, the Human Relations Center. You're the author of Dream Tending, the book, and also the training series. And then most recently have specialized in what it means to kind of move forward and work with active imagination, and imagination in general. And came out with your most latest book, The Imagination Matrix. So there's a lot of different chapters that you've been a part of. And part of how you came up this last time was in words, actually, where
Mm,
she talked about this experience of being on the UCLA campus and
right.
feeling a calling to go into mental health.
Mm,
And what connected in my brain was this very fond memory I have of you leading the introduction to Pacifica days. I think it's called the Pacifica Experience. And you would ask this room full of potential students what brought them there and what is their calling into this field. And
mm.
so my first question's a little broad, but I'd love to just hear into what your calling was into this field and how you experience the calling to move through others.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, well, I'll try to keep it brief because it touches my heart, actually. I was at UCLA, and that was a different time, right? That was a time of the Vietnam War, and that was just starting to pick up steam like it does virtually in every generation. It's one war after the next. And I'm there and I'm involved and engaged and really feeling the hurt and the pain, not only for the many, many people that had made so many sacrifices, but also for my dear friends who I went to high school with, who are now in Vietnam. And unlike the world of today, then, there was so much protest against the war that even the people that were there fighting and the vets um, weren't affirmed. They weren't really appreciated. And that was hurtful, really hurtful. And so many of us had friends that were, in harm's way, life and death situations. I graduated from UCLA and then needed to figure out what next, right? And ultimately, I ended up in Santa Barbara and went to grad school at UCSB and wanted still to do something. I wanted to do something to work with the pain and the hurt that I was experiencing, and so many others were. And also, I needed money to be a student and live there, right? So I went to the career counseling center where there was a work study board, right? And I noticed that there was a availability that they wanted to start a community counseling center in Alta Vista, which is right next door to the university. They wanted to do that, I think, because in part it was funded by the University of California Regents There was a lot of rumbling. There was a lot of, as well as the hurt and pain. So they seeded 3 or 4 programs. That was the one. So we started there in community counseling, really in service. Honestly, I had 2 or 3 counseling classes as an undergrad, not much at all. But then at UCSB, I was in the Confluent Education Counseling Psychology graduate program. But there it was, right? And kids, adolescents, families were hurting. Alcoholism was really big, but mostly it was the vets and people in the community. And that's where we started, a small group of us, really. And the way we really equipped ourselves, because we didn't work as clinical therapists. At that point, I wasn't a licensed marriage family therapist. I was not a licensed clinical psychologist. We were into something called paraprofessional community counseling, peer counseling. And we would go up and down the state to workshops and to training programs, and we would essentially become self-trained. I mean, those were the days of the human potentials movement. Virginia Satir was a person that we would study with, oh, going back in time, right? And so many others. Carl Rogers was at that point. It was all of that ilk. That's the beginning place.
So when I hear into your answer, and I'm hearing what you're saying now, and I've heard glimpses of this story before too, it sounds like there was a cultural pulse moving through where you really felt like you were meeting the pain and suffering of the moment, both personally and individually through the peer counseling and collectively through a war and the human potential movement and kind of what was being asked.
That's true. And you asked about calling, right? And honestly, yes, there was a calling, but more to the point is what you're sharing right now. There was a response to the pulse of what was happening in culture. And that little, we started in a little apartment, had 2 rooms in the apartment, right? And the living room was our group room, and the bedroom was our consulting room, and the kitchen we converted, and that was our office space. Yeah.
Mhm.
But those 2 rooms in that Ala Vista apartment turned into, now 50-year anniversary coming right up at Pacifica Graduate Institute, 2 big university campuses in graduate studies. And if one would say, people ask me all the time, hey, how did you imagine that? Well, honestly, I did not. It was not a question of following a grand vision. It really wasn't. It was something for me about being in service to something that was moving through, right? It was feeling into what's being asked now. And if I would have tried to plan it all, I would have used my rational mind, I guess, and tried to figure it all out. I don't think that would have worked. But I was following something else. I was following a calling. I was following care. I was following service, and I was following something that was really not fully materialized or unknown at that point.
And I'm not sure if I guess I'll share it and but you'd mentioned there was a draft, you had friends that were a part of this, and there was a way that maybe people in my generation have never experienced that level of everyone being involved in something, maybe outside of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic,
Yeah.
where there wasn't as much choice in what was going on.
Oh, no, that's a great story. I mean, no, there was not. I mean, we were all. It did not matter if you were in school or out of school, if you're rich, poor, whatever, right? There was what was called a lottery, and they would everybody was going into the draft. I mean, that's how it was. And I'll never forget that night, right? We're in the dorm. I'm a freshman at that point, and we're in the dorms and all together. And oh my gosh, our friends and our boyfriends and girlfriends and friends of all kinds along with us, and just waiting for the numbers to be picked. And what they would do is pick a birthday, and they would assign that birthday to a particular number. So we were all just waiting. And oh my gosh, the people that had the early numbers, the 1 through 100 numbers, oh, the grief, their close friends, their intimate friends, they were just crying. It was really something. We were gripped by what was happening. I got number 205, as if I would forget, right? I'll never forget that number, 205. But I thought for sure, oh my goodness, there's a lot of numbers, goes up to 360 something. And so I thought I would be drafted, and I assumed that I would be, actually. So you can see the pressure, just what you're saying, right? You can feel the grip that we're all experiencing. The end of that story is right when it got to the number 200, the government made an announcement. They said, "We have gone to 200 and the draft is over. Anybody that has a number above that, you're not going to be drafted." Okay?
Wow.
Wow. Can you imagine? Oh, oh my. All
And
the scenarios planned out. Okay, relax. It's time just to be with my friends and now figure out ways that we can really support our dear friends that are drafted.
absolutely. And I bring that up because that's not a consciousness that I think is alive in this newer generation of therapists in, understanding what that is. And again, I go back to maybe the exception of COVID pandemic, but very different. And so you're calling, I don't know, survivor's guilt or how do, even if I'm not drafted, how do I participate? The spirit in you that met that moment is what urged you into mental health. And it wasn't mental health like we know it. It was supporting everybody in this inevitable where there was not a lot of control.
There was not a lot of control, and then we had to learn the ways of working with mental health, right?
Mhm.
Then when our friends came back, how to work with trauma, post-traumatic stress, how to work with addiction, with alcoholism and drugs, how to work in family systems with families going all over the place. So then, the necessity of learning skill sets that we could be um, more effective in the long-term way. And we were equipped at that point. We were training paraprofessionals, right? We were training community people to take care of community people and
Right.
these support groups.